Right, so if you want to turn to Exodus 32, we're not going to read from there just yet, but just turn to there. We'll get ready by turning to there anyway, and then we'll read it at the appropriate time. Exodus 32, coming to the end of the book, hoping to get the series done before Christmas. And incidentally, if you have anything you'd like me to, I haven't thought about next year yet, but if you have anything you want me to cover, or any book you want me to go through, or anything like that, just let me know, send me a message, give me a call, drag me aside some point and say, here, I wouldn't mind studying this theme or this book or whatever. I'm open for suggestions. But turn to Exodus 32. We're not going to read it just yet. We're coming to the end of our series, like I said at the start. Or I said a few seconds ago. But what I did say at the start is that we weren't going to go through the book sort of chapter by chapter, verse by verse, because we would be there for forever. And there's a lot of the book where it talks about a lot of the laws and a lot of the building of the tabernacle. It's like wading through treacle sometimes, going through that. Now, it's important to read and to study, but that's something I think you can do in private study. We're instead going to look at some themes through the book. And I hope you found that interesting over the last number of weeks, and you've come away knowing a little bit more about Exodus. Next time I plan to, by way of summary, have something to show us that might help us get an overview of the book. I find it helpful anyway, so we'll show you that next time in 2 weeks' time. Today, what I'm going to do is pick up on something Hugh said last time we met. And it was a good point. If you remember, Hugh said, Moses must have been some guy to be the only one to be able to meet with God on the mountain. Do you remember we were talking about that and the holiness and the way that Mount Sinai was paralleled in the temple with the different levels of holiness that you have to be, in a sense, to get up the mountain to God. That was mirrored in the tabernacle with the different levels of holiness to get into the center, and how the tabernacle was a mobile Mount Sinai, because you couldn't bring the mountain with you, you then brought the tabernacle with you. And Hugh was right. Moses was special, because not everyone was able to speak to God. In fact, Moses was the only one to speak to him as face to face. It says that in Exodus 33:11, the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. So Moses was the only one to be able to do this. And yet at the same time, he wasn't allowed to see God's face and live. There was a past part of the chapter or the book that we didn't look at when Moses asked to see God, and God wouldn't show his face to God, otherwise he would die, but he saw sort of the back of him as he passed through in the cleft of the rock. But God did choose Moses, and he set him apart for this task to be the mediator or the intercessor of God's people. But Moses wasn't all sugar and spice, and that's what I want us to look at today. He isn't the man to model in every way anyway. And what we're going to do today is we're going to look at two events in Moses' life. One, where he is fulfilling his role as mediator and intercessor between God and his people. And he's doing a great job of it. And then we're going to look at another one where he makes a dog's dinner of it. So we're going to look at the first one first. You have turned to Exodus 32. We're going to read a few verses there from Exodus 32. Read along with me, starting at verse 1. Of course, this is the word of the Lord. And it says, when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, this is when he's getting the law, the tablets the first time round, they gathered around Aaron and said, come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him. Aaron answered them, take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him, and he made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. Go over to verse 15. Moses turns and he went down the mountain with the two tablets of the covenant law in his hands. They were inscribed on both sides, front and back. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people shouting, Joshua was coming down the mountain with Moses at this point. When Joshua heard the noise of the people shouting, he said to Moses, "There is the sound of war in the camp." Moses replied, "It's not the sound of victory. It is not the sound of defeat. It is the sound of singing that I hear." When Moses approached the camp, he saw the calf and the dancing, and his anger burned. And he threw the tablets out of his hand, breaking them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. And he took the calf the people had made and burned it in the fire. Then he ground it into powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. Now turn over to verse 30, and this is the important bit here. This is where Moses is fulfilling his role as mediator and intercessor. Verse 30 of Exodus 32. The next day Moses said to the people, "You have committed a great sin, but now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." Here is Moses interceding on behalf of the people. So Moses went back to the Lord and said, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold. But now please forgive their sin. But if not, then blot me out of the book you have written." The Lord replied to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book." So what we have here in these verses is Moses, like I said, doing a good job of being an intercessor or mediator for the people. You've got the people of Israel, and you've got Moses standing between them and God, speaking on their behalf. That's what an intercessor does. And he's angered by the fact that the Israelites have so quickly turned away from Yahweh and have started worshipping a golden calf. Moses is up on top of the mountain speaking with God, getting the law, and he's taking so long that they're thinking, well, I don't know where he is. Maybe he's dead. Let's make ourselves our own gods. And he's angered by the fact, and God is angry that this has happened, and he's ready to wipe the nation out. One verse I didn't read out is verse 10. If you look at verse 10, God says to Moses, "Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them." Listen to those words again, how fierce they are. It should make you tremble in a sense. God says to Moses, "Leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I might destroy them." But then the verse continues, "Then I will make you into a great nation, Moses." So he's planning to wipe them out and make Moses into a great nation, which takes a lot of humility on Moses' side to say no to that. I know I'd be tempted to say, well, okay, if that's what you want, you can make me into a great nation. Moses didn't do that. What he did is he pleaded with the Lord to relent. And when he speaks to the people, did you notice what he said? Go to verse 30 again. Moses said to the people, "You have committed a great sin, but now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." He said, "Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." And the reader of Exodus is expecting him to bring up a lamb with him to sacrifice. But that's not what happens this time. In this instance, and this is why I said this is Moses modeling what an intercessor would do, Moses offers himself as the sacrifice here. Verses 31 and 32, Moses went back to the Lord and said, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold, but now please forgive their sin. But if not, blot me out of the book you have written." That's real intercession right there. Moses is offering himself to be killed to let the nation go free. But God says, no, you're not the one to die in place of the nation. And of course we know why. Jesus is the one to do that. Jesus is the one to die in place of his people. But this event is a foreshadowing of Jesus, of what Jesus would do. Moses was willing to do what Jesus eventually did. Jesus was the atoning sacrifice for sin, but not just of Israel, for all of those who would believe in him. I don't turn to it, but 1 John 4, verse 10, this is love, John writes, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sin. And so what we have here in Exodus is Moses is representing the nation to die as an atoning sacrifice for their sin. And in Jesus, he represents us before the Father. And he died as an atoning sacrifice for our sin. Moses was a foreshadowing of Jesus. And that's great. That's Moses at his high point. But Moses also had a downfall. And this isn't in the book of Exodus, but it leads us back to Exodus. But turn a couple of books away to Numbers 20, please. You have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, then Numbers, so 2 books. Numbers 20. In Exodus, just after they come out of Egypt and through the Red Sea, they come to a place where there's no water, and God provides water for them. But in Numbers 20, the children of Israel are at a place again where there's no water, and they are grumbling again. This is a pattern in the children of Israel. They grumble all the time. And Moses and Aaron consult God about what to do. They're grumbling, there's no water, and God says this to Moses. Look at verse 8 of Numbers 20. God says, take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community, so they and their livestock can drink. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock. And Moses said to them, listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock? Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me or trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land that I give them. Now look at the text carefully. Look at verse 8. What is Moses to do to the rock? He isn't to strike the rock. The first time around he is to strike the rock. This time around he is not to strike the rock. He is to speak to the rock. Do you see that in verse 8? He's to speak to it, not hit it. But Moses is so angry. He's had enough of this nation and their grumbling and their griping that he has had enough, and he's angry. And so he says, if you look at what he says, must we bring you water out of the rock? He's talking about himself and Aaron. It's almost like the power has gone to his head, as if he has the power to do that. So you imagine him there in front of the rock with the nation of Israel beside them saying, you rebels, do you want Moses or do you want Aaron and myself to bring water out of this rock? Fine, we'll do it. And he hits the rock twice. So not only does he not speak to the rock, he hits it, but he attributes this miracle to himself and Aaron and not to God. And that was the thing. God didn't honor, or Moses didn't honor God. And as a result, he didn't see the promised land. 40 years of leading the people from Egypt to the promised land. And he can see it, but he doesn't get to go in. So Moses was some guy, but he wasn't perfect. But at the same time, I can empathize with Moses, because when people do continually grumble, especially when you're bending over backwards for them, it's hard not to get annoyed or angry. But for Moses, he just went too far. And he didn't honor God with that miracle, and God punished him as a result. Now, just as an aside, like I said, Moses striking the rock wasn't the first time he did it. Now we go back to Exodus, because we're studying the book of Exodus. Go to Exodus 17. Exodus 17, they're just out of Egypt. And look at verse 1. And there's something just to note here. Exodus 17, verse 1. It says, the whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses. There, they're grumbling again. They quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. Moses replied, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. And they said, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst? Then Moses cried out to the Lord, what am I to do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me. The Lord answered Moses, go out in front of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink. So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? Now, I want us to notice something about this instance. This time, God doesn't say speak to the rock. He says, take the staff and hit the rock. And if you look there at verse 6, I think, God says, I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. And in the Hebrew, it means in front of the rock. And Moses is going to strike the rock so that water comes out. And that's what happened. But if Yahweh is standing in front of the rock, it means that Moses has to strike Yahweh as he hits the rock. The Lord was struck to provide water for his people, to save them from dying of thirst. And living water, fast-flowing water, flowed from the rock and stopped them dying of thirst. But Yahweh was struck for that water to come forth. And as some people have noted, with Jesus, he stands between us and the Father. Like Moses interceded between the people and God, Jesus stands between us and God, the Father, and he himself was struck. And he calls himself the living water. He's the water of life that brings life to us. And when he was physically struck on the cross with the spear, blood and water flowed out. And so Jesus was struck on our behalf so that we would have life, so that we would be able to drink that living water and be saved. And so while Moses was a great guy, and like I said last time, it's very easy to want to emulate, or to say, even as from the front, to say, be like David, be like Moses, be like Joshua, be like Paul. They have their flaws as well, because they're sinful people. Jesus is the much better intercessor than Moses ever was, because he never got to that point where he sinned. Moses did. Moses was human. But Jesus was better. And he is a better intercessor, standing between us and the Father, representing us before the Father, being that atoning sacrifice and offering himself before the Father to make atonement for our sin. And he was the one that was struck so that we could live. But at the same time, I take comfort in the fact that Moses wasn't perfect, that he got angry and so on, because it gives me hope. That as one trying to be holy and walking with the Lord, I'm not perfect either. But if God could use Moses, he can use me as well, and he can use you as well, despite our imperfections. And I take some comfort in that too.